Hello everybody, my name's Wolf, and through this series of videos I'm going to explain to you the crazy, over-the-top world that nerds like me love so much, that is Warhammer 40,000. So get comfy, strap in, and prepare for a Noob-Splaining session. Necrons, the space skeleton robots of 40k. One of the factions that were added to 40k for the 3rd edition, but actually made an appearance long before that. By the time they were added to 40k, it was already over a decade old, so somehow you need to create lore for a new faction and then shoehorn it all into the current setting. And the Necrons not only managed to shoehorn themselves in, but also did the same for the Eldar and Orcs. So today, let's have a look at what is arguably the scariest faction in 40k, due to the fact they have some of the most powerful technology and the damn things just won't stay dead. The history of the Necrons goes way back, long before humanity had even appeared on Earth. They started out as normal aliens called the Necrons. The Necrons had a pretty shite starting planet, as it was too close to their sun, resulting them in ending up with very short lifespans due to the massive amounts of solar radiation bombarding their planet. So the race as a whole dedicated itself to science. This led them to be very technologically advanced for the species age. As they were studying the universe around them, they discovered the Old Ones. The Old Ones were a race of immortal super beings, so the Necrons asked them to make them immortal as well, or at the very least help them increase their rather short shelf lives. The Old Ones said of course we will, as that is a nice thing to do. Wait a minute, this is 40k. As this is 40k, the Old Ones basically told them to fuck off. So naturally they went to war with the Old Ones. This is akin to a bunch of toddlers with sticks picking a fight with the US military. Needless to say, the Necrons got their asses well and truly kicked. This was called the First War in Heaven, but that's misleading as it was more of a one-sided slaughter. So the Necrons started looking elsewhere in the galaxy for a solution to both their radiation problem and something that could deal with the Old Ones. It was then that they discovered the godlike beings called the C'tan. The C'tan offered the Necrons to transform their consciousness into living metal bodies, thus granting them immortality, and also offered to help them exterminate the Old Ones for their previous unhelpful behaviour. Turns out this was a trick, and it actually turned 99.99% of them into slaves for the C'tan, who also devoured all the Necrons' souls, which then in turn made the C'tan even more overpowered. They did however make good on their promise to help spank the Old Ones, as the C'tan had also been spanked by the Old Ones previously themselves. The Necrons now in their metal bodies started referring to themselves as just Necrons, and thanks to the toys the C'tan had given them, they were now armed with Gauss rifles that obliterated anything it hit back into its constituent molecules, and ships that can teleport anywhere in the galaxy in the blink of an eye without using the warp. Thus the Second War of Heaven began, and this one was way more balanced than the first one. The C'tan and the Necrons eventually started getting the upper hand, though the Old Ones realised this a little bit too late. In a panic, the Old Ones created several new races to fight for them. One of these were the Krogs, which were meant to be the ground troops and decimate the Necrons so badly they couldn't reassemble themselves. The other was the Eldar, who were powerful psykers meant to obliterate the C'tan with warp powers, as the C'tan were particularly weak and susceptible to warp powers. If the Old Ones had created these two races early on, it would have been very similar to the First War in Heaven, but the arrogant twats who were already 2-0 up against the Necrons and C'tan thought they had this in the bag, and the whole thing would only take 3 days. Anyway, at the culmination of the War in Heaven, we're not quite sure what happened to the Old Ones. They either fucked off somewhere or were all killed. While the C'tan were celebrating their epic win, Zarek, the silent king of the Necrons who had retained his complete consciousness, turned the Necron army on the C'tan. The Necron army shattered every single one of the C'tan into shards, and making them just a mere shadow of how powerful they were. He did this out of revenge for enslaving all his people, so I suppose we can't really blame him for that. He then realised the Krogs and the Eldar would absolutely kick the Necrons' teeth so far down their robotic throats, to clean them they would need to shove an electric toothbrush up their arse, especially seeing as he'd just shafted their most powerful troops, the C'tan. So, he ordered all the Necrons to bury themselves in tombs on the various planets and to have a little nap, while he himself fucked off out of the galaxy in a sulk, as it was he himself who agreed to the C'tan's offer to transfer his people into androids. This was 60 million years ago. With the Krogs having no one to fight, they then just kind of wandered around the galaxy and devolved into the 8-foot killer orcs that we have and love today. This left the Eldar with a free galaxy to claim as their own. So they did. So while dinosaurs were still wandering the Earth, the Eldar started down a dark path that would eventually lead to the birth of Slaanesh, roughly 30,000 years in our current future. Somewhere around the year 40,000, Zarek made a return, and someone discovered a tomb world awakening the Necrons, who instantly decided they want their galaxy back, only to find most of their planets are infested with humans or the much weaker orcs compared to the Krogs they were used to fighting. Just like that, we had an explanation on why undead robots are crawling out of the ground all across the galaxy and where the orcs and Eldar came from. Prior to that, the orcs were always just there, and the Eldar origin was hinted that the old ones made them for fun. The Necron weapon in the lore is supposed to be devastating to anything it shoots at, reducing it back down to its constituent molecules. But then, so are all the guns in 40k. Their tech, however, is way ahead of anything else. For example, they have a holographic recreation of the entire galaxy, and if you delete a planet in the holograph, it deletes it from reality. If that's not overpowered technology, I don't know what is. On the tabletop, the Necrons are a powerful army that have the annoying habit of standing back up after you kill them, just like any good undead horde should do, which is what they really are. The undead in space. You see, when their first official codex dropped, 40k was not the behemoth it is today. In fact, most of the player base was still playing Warhammer Fantasy Battle, as it was still Games Workshop's flagship game. In an attempt to get players into both, they started shamelessly adopting all the factions from Fantasy into 40k. The Eldar became Craftworld Eldar and were meant to be the High Elves, the Dark Eldar were the Dark Elves, the Exodite Eldar were going to be the Wood Elves, and the Necrons were the Undead and were pushed to the moon as the latest big bad in the setting. It did backfire somewhat as the bulk of the player base transitioned from Fantasy to 40k instead of playing both, myself included. It's fair to assume this was because at the time ranged weapons were very powerful in Fantasy. So having the same game with everyone having ranged weapons was very tempting, as you weren't just spending the first few turns of the game, i.e. the first hour, just moving your armies about before you got to the fun stuff of actually fighting. Ironically today, 40k has made melee combat utterly devastating compared to shooting. Now this was all happening round about the time of the last quarter of 2nd edition and the first quarter of the release of 3rd, and it's when 40k started getting a rep as Fantasy Battle in Space. I mean, it was kind of understandable, as both games pretty much used the exact same game system, the same stats for units, the same dice roll mechanics of roll to hit, wound and save. So Games Workshop made the decision to try and make 40k stand out, and started to release factions that were totally unique to 40k. They already had the Tyranids, so they added the Tau, and the whole Exodite's army was quietly dropped. Now this is where some jumped up little prick will say in the comments that the Tau Codex were out first. Well, not quite. The first Tau Codex was released in 2001, and the first official Codex of Necrons was printed in 2002, but the first real Codex was in 1998 in White Dwarf, and this itself was based on this model. The Chaos Android, which first appeared in the 1990 Space Crusade game, so the Necrons were in the planning long before that. The first iteration of Necrons were really a rip-off of the T-800, and it wasn't until around 6th edition when the whole range was retooled and given the Dynasty's background a much more unique look instead of totally not ripping off Terminator look. More Necron characters were added, and they even teamed up with the Blood Angels to fight the Tyranids, and assisted the Eldar and Belisarius Cawl to awaken Rabuk Gilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines. Part of this transformation has moved them away from the generic space skeleton bad guys into a more neutral androids that want their galaxy back, but they do understand they might have to work with some of the other factions to ensure there is still a galaxy for them to reclaim. As always, the models these days are superb looking, and they are definitely a quality over quantity army. Now this is probably the first time you will hear me say this, but no, I do not want to grab some in the future. This is no way me saying the Necrons are bad, but back in the day when I was playing Undead in Fantasy Battle, I was sick of being curb stomped by the High Elves, so I was already well invested in an Eldar army in 40k when the Necron Codex dropped. I was sick of a slow-moving, shambling horde that couldn't hit the side of a barn at 20 paces, and had no desire to repeat that playstyle, so I went for the fastest, deadliest, most accurate army at the time. Plus I had over 15,000 points of skeleton, and quite frankly I'm just sick to death of assembling and painting skeletons, so we'll probably never paint one again, and that includes space skeletons. Also, the Necrons are all silver, bronze trim and green glowy bits, which just seems a bit boring to me. Yeah, sure, you can paint them any colour you want, but if it's not silver and bronze, it's not a proper Necron. The same way it's not a proper Custodes if it's not gold, or it's not a proper Ducati if it's not red. And if anyone out there has a Ducati that's not red, you need to take a long hard look at your life choices. The Necrons have come a long way over the years, from being soulless space skeletons to, well, soulless space skeletons, with the addition of some brilliantly written and sometimes hilarious characters. The Necrons are definitely on the Imperium's to-do over list, and vice versa, but both factions have bigger fish to fry in the form of Chaos and the Tyranid High Fleet Leviathan right now. And there we have it. That brings us to the end of this video. If you laughed or learnt anything, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and if you are already subscribed, then don't forget to share this video with somebody who could do with some noob-splaining in their life. Also, leave a comment on your favourite part. I do try and interact with every comment. But if you made it this far, thank you, and I'll see you next time.